What would you do if strangers showed up at your family's cabin with papers saying it wasn't yours anymore? One knock on the door, and suddenly everything was on the line. The memories, the fights to keep it, even the promise a father made to his daughter by the lake. When the HOA came to take it all, they didn't expect what came next: soldiers, arrests, and a battle that shook the whole town. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you're here right now, you're part of this fight too. So stick with us. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss moments like this. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The first knock sounds like a verdict and the second like a countdown. And before anyone breathes, the door swings and two HOA enforcers push papers into David's chest as if the ink itself bites, demanding signatures and surrender by sundown. So he laughs, the kind of laugh people use to keep their hands from shaking, tears the packet through the middle, and asks who they think they are while his heart ricochets between rage and disbelief. Because how does a neighborhood committee steal a man's past in one afternoon? Karen arrives in white like a challenge, not a wrinkle out of place, voice sharpened to draw blood as she announces that bylaws outrank sentiment and expansion outranks grief. And suddenly the room feels smaller because she names the hour they take the cabin and names the price she swears he'll pay if he resists, daring him to fold first, as if folding were ever in his blood. So he answers with a thin smile that says, "Try it and see what breaks first, your courage or your plan." Lena hears from the hall and steps into view, a 16-year-old fuse already lit, reminding everyone that her grandfather taught her to tie knots on this porch and to keep promises longer than storms. And if they think memory is soft, they should watch what happens when memory learns to fight, because she won't let a committee erase the last good thing holding her together. And even Karen blinks at the force of it, because there's more steel in a teenager who loved right than in a stack of papers printed wrong, isn't there? An enforcer taps his clipboard like a metronome of threats while another lifts a phone to film, framing David as the problem in a story they plan to sell. And David steps closer until the camera catches the steadiness in his eyes and the refusal in his jaw. The quiet answer that ruins villains because it promises patience, not panic, and patience outlasts tantrums. So the man with the phone mutters something about aggression and backs up even as he keeps recording, because that's how cowards stand tall on screens, right? Karen orders the trucks in, and the sound of engines rips through the stillness as HOA security rolls up with fence panels and smug certainty. Men hopping down with tape and posts like they're building a cage around a memory, and David and Lena move without speaking, shoulder to shoulder in the driveway. Two people forming a wall that feels bigger than their bodies because it includes every dinner eaten here and every story told here and the last touch of a father's hand on a son's shoulder. When words weren't enough, and who walks through that without flinching? A guard nudges forward, muttering that policy is policy, and his shoulder clips David like it's a test he expects to win. But David plants his feet, and the nudge becomes a shove, and the shove becomes a mistake, because the same hand that tore paper now swats the guy's wrist aside, and the clipboard skitters across gravel like a fallen crown. And for a heartbeat, the whole line trembles, because bullies don't train for resistance. They train for surrender. And what do they do when surrender doesn't show? Karen signals again, sharper, angrier, promising fees, liens, a tidal wave of forms that will drown them by sunset. And Lena smiles with a humor that stings, asking if they brought a form that erases love or a stamp big enough to crush a promise. And one of the men snorts, calls her a kid, while the others pretend not to notice the way their palms sweat, because certainty gets slippery when courage stands in the road. So they try volume instead, as if louder ever meant stronger, doesn't it? Sirens slice the noise, and Karen straightens like a queen expecting her knights, already rehearsing a performance about violent residents and hostile claims. But the cruiser rolls in and the officer steps out with the calm that ends arguments, eyes moving from ripped pages to trembling hands to the fence in the truck bed. And he tells Karen the quiet truth everyone else dodges, that no one is taking anything today without a court order. That property rights are not party favors, and the air changes because authority, real authority, just took a side. And whose side did anyone think it would be? Karen reaches for new weapons, not the metal kind, the rumor kind, hissing about code violations and fake deeds and back dues that don't exist. And the officer holds up a palm that turns noise into silence. instructs the trucks to reverse and the men to stand down. And one by one they obey because uniforms without power bow to uniforms with law. And Karen's face cracks at the edges because her script doesn't include defeat in Act 1. But here it is, and where does she go from here without losing the throne she built out of fear? David breathes. Finally, a slow inhale that tastes like a second chance, and he thanks the officer without bowing because gratitude isn't surrender, it's recognition. While Lena studies Karen the way storm watchers study the sky after lightning, waiting for the next strike, and sure enough, Karen spits a promise of escalation, swearing the county will finish what the HOA started and threatening consequences for everyone who stood in her way. And with a whirl of white, she storms off to gather bigger teeth, because tyrants always look for taller ladders when the first one snaps, don't they? The enforcers retreat to their trucks in uncomfortable silence, muttering about misunderstandings they authored, and the officer lingers long enough to tell David to document everything, to keep phone and mind ready, because round one never ends the war, and David nods, a small vow forming where fear used to live, that this fight will end clean and legal, not because they want it gentle, but because justice that stands up once keeps standing. And isn't that the only kind worth trusting? Lena watches the road where Karen vanished and then looks at her father with a decision bright as a flare, saying she has someone to call, and it won't be friendly, but it will be fair, that some promises need muscle just to survive the night. And she steps aside with her phone already ringing, voice low, steady, urgent, while David studies the torn papers at his feet like bones of something dead that keeps pretending to move, wondering who answers a teenager with the power to make bullies remember laws they forgot. And what happens when that power arrives wearing boots? A breeze carries the kind of hush that sits right before a verdict, and the officer pulls away with a final nod, as if to say hold, stay, watch, and David gathers the shredded claim into a neat stack and sets it on the railing as a souvenir he plans to frame when this ends, a warning label for anyone who tries again. While Lena returns with eyes that say everything without telling it, promising help, protection, and a reckoning. And she grips his hand hard enough to anchor him to the porch. Because storms do their worst when families blink, and there won't be any blinking here tonight, will there? Lena ends the call with a breath that sounds like a decision snapping into place, tells David she asked for help that listens to law, not gossip, and asks if he trusts her enough to let the next move be hers, because the people who came today want fear more than justice. And fear won't live here another hour, will it? Morning scrapes in with the stomp of purpose as Karen returns in white, county official at her side, clipboard held like a verdict already signed, and she smirks while reading final notice for immediate seizure, pausing on each word like it's a blade meant to make them bleed slowly. And David rips the notice in two with a soft laugh that says the game changed overnight, didn't it? Engines rumble from the road. Not the skittish kind from HOA pickups, a deeper rhythm that makes the county man swallow his script and faces turn as olive trucks roll to a stop like a wall learning to breathe, soldiers stepping down with steady hands and calm eyes, not to fight, but to hold a line where the line belongs. And Karen's confidence flickers because power feels different when it doesn't scream, doesn't it? The commander introduces himself without swagger and asks who claims authority to break into a home without a court order. And the county man lifts a form and lowers it again when the commander gently flags the missing judge's seal, the absent case number, the amateur hour, and the tension shifts like weight redistributing on a bridge that just found bedrock. And who pushes forward when bedrock says no? Lena steps up, voice even, explaining she called a cousin who serves and knows the policy for civil standby when threats escalate. And the commander nods because the request came clean and the situation fits. And the soldiers form a calm barrier between the porch and the pack, palms open, posture grounded, a message written in posture rather than volume. And what does a bully do when the quiet becomes undeniable? Karen tries a different weapon, the one she polishes more than any ring, a smile that says you'll regret crossing me. And she tells the county man to proceed anyway, because she'll handle fallout later. But the officer from yesterday arrives at that exact beat and tells her later is already here, that any attempt to remove so much as a nail will trigger arrests. And suddenly her smile looks borrowed, doesn't it? An HOA member tests the soldiers like a kid poking a fence, steps toward the porch holding a tape measure as if inches could substitute for permission, and a private blocks him with a gentle hand and a simple sentence about private property and recorded evidence, and the man retreats while pretending he meant to, cheeks hot, eyes reckless, because humiliation is gasoline to small men. And how long until a spark lands? David stays level, thanks the commander, then turns to the county man and offers a copy of the deed with witnesses and dates that tie back to a father who paid every tax on time. A father who taught his boy to be patient until patience becomes iron, and the county man's eyes soften like paperwork learning shame, and he tucks the deed into his folder as if it might burn him if he folds it wrong. Because truth has edges, doesn't it? Lena walks to Karen and lays down a photo of her and her grandfather, both laughing with fish on a line that looks heavier than grief, says kindly that some places belong to families more than maps, and Karen stares at the image as if joy were an accusation, jaw tight, knuckles whiter than the cloth she chose to wear to a fight she started, because purity isn't a color, it's a choice. And what did she choose? Karen tips into fury, shouting about interference, claiming harassment, calling the soldiers political theater, and the commander lets her finish every note of outrage, then repeats the same clean sentence about court orders and safety that he will keep repeating until the message sinks or cuffs click, and the HOA members glance at one another with the look of people who fear headlines more than handcuffs. And how quickly do fair-weather loyalists evaporate? The county man gathers his team, mutters that they were misled about the order's status, promises to return with a judge or not at all, and actually apologizes to David with a stiffness that admits he should have known better, and Karen hisses that he's weak while watching her support evaporate, because nothing terrifies a pretender like sunlight on the stage, right? A boyish board member edges up to Karen and tries to whisper that this looks bad, that maybe they pause, and she slices him down with a look that could salt fields, ordering everyone to stand firm, and he steps back with the posture of someone calculating exits, because loyalty rented by fear returns itself without a receipt, and who wants to go down with a queen whose crown is plastic? The officer pulls David aside and quietly advises documenting threats, saving every clip, keeping a log of times and names, and Lena is already ahead of it. Phone note open, timestamps precise, the kind of care that turns chaos into evidence. And David squeezes her shoulder with a gratitude that says, I see you, and I needed you, and I will remember this forever. Because love keeps score in acts, not words, doesn't it? Karen makes one last attempt at theater, stepping toward the line with a chin high and a threat higher, claiming she'll bring state power and federal letters, and storms no umbrella can bear. And the commander simply answers that the law reads the same at every level. And the officer adds that threats are now on record. And Karen stumbles over her next sentence like a heel catching on truth, because balance requires honesty. And she left hers at home, didn't she? Silence falls the way a verdict does when everyone knows what it means, and the HOA crew begins drifting to their trucks, faces set to neutral like masks after a bad play, and tires crunch away one by one until only Karen, the county car, the soldiers, and two people on a porch remain. And for the first time in days, David's shoulders drop from his ears, because some weights uninstall themselves when justice plugs in, right? The county team turns to leave, but one man lingers a second too long, eyes sliding toward the trees as if checking for an answer that isn't on the form, and he gives Karen the tiniest nod, a moth-wing signal that doesn't belong to daylight. And when he finally sits inside the car, his hands shake as if he just agreed to something he won't survive. And who whispers plans were lock in here? Karen backs away slowly, voice cooled to a blade, promising that night will be less polite, that paperwork is only one road, that fires find shortcuts no map admits. And she taps a text into her phone with the precision of someone ordering damage like dessert, then spins on her heel and vanishes down the lane with a smile that reads like a dare. And what kind of person promises Ash to win a vote? Lena watches her go and tells David that people who threaten fire invite rain they don't control, that bullies always forget nature doesn't take bribes. And David nods with a half smile because the child he raised now stands like a shield he never knew he would need, the kind that doesn't rust. And he tells her they will meet whatever comes as exactly what they are, a family that refuses to bow, because bending to fear costs more than losing a roof, doesn't it? The soldiers settle into calm positions that look like patience made visible. The officer loops back once more to confirm the report numbers, The county car disappears beyond the hill, and quiet returns in a way that hums rather than rests, the prelude to either healing or war. And David feels both pulling at the same nerve, because peace borrowed can be recalled without warning, can't it? Lena pockets her phone and says the next hours matter more than the next year. That preparation is the shape of hope when enemies prefer smoke. And David agrees, already listing the checks they'll do, the contacts they'll call, the backups they'll set, because love organizes faster than fear when truth hands it a clipboard. And he asks if her cousin will keep the units in place through the night. And Lena answers with a nod thick with gratitude and steel. And is there anything stronger than thank you armed with follow-through? A twig snaps from the tree line behind the fence, sharp and small, but it lands in the mind like a flare seen from far away, and a figure shifts just enough to be real before stilling again, a watcher measuring resolve, a hand hovering near a pocket as if closing around a decision, and the last thought before the day exhales is simple and electric and cold. Someone heard Karen's promise and intends to cash it after dark. And who sleeps when a match is waiting for a hand? The first sound is not thunder but a truck door slamming, the kind that snaps everyone's heads toward the road. Headlights multiply until the dirt glows white. HOA cars stretching down the lane like a parade of bad intentions. Shouts spill from windows, board members yelling about property lines, waving phones to live stream their outrage. They want an audience and they want to fight. David stands on the porch with his arms crossed, no longer hiding the weight of the bat he carries. Lena stands next to him, hands balled into fists, the fire in her chest visible in the way she refuses to take a step back. The soldiers stay calm but shift their boots into a wider stance, a wall of quiet force waiting for someone to cross it. The HOA mob grows bolder with every second they're ignored. They start chanting, shouting insults, accusing David of stealing from the community. Someone hurls a beer can that explodes on the gravel, foamy spray shooting toward the steps. Another man throws a rock, and this time it shatters the front window in a burst that makes Lena flinch but stay put. David's blood surges like an alarm and he moves down the steps, but Lena grabs his arm with both hands, reminding him that a single wrong move turns their fight into her footage, not his victory. She begs him to wait, to let the HOA cross the line first. The restraint is harder than anger, but David forces his jaw shut. Karen finally arrives, late enough to make an entrance, stepping out of her SUV like a queen surveying peasants. The crowd goes quiet for her. She strides forward carrying 2 red gas cans and places them in full view, her voice rising as she calls the cabin a blight that will be gone before the week ends. Lena's voice cuts through the night like a blade. She shouts that the first drop of fuel that touches the ground will turn into evidence that puts Karen in handcuffs before sunrise. Karen smirks, daring her to try, daring the soldiers to act. Before a single cap can twist open, harsh white light floods the road. Massive military trucks roll in from the far end of the lane, backup units sent after Lena's cousin heard what was coming. Their arrival feels like a second verdict, this one heavier than the first. The HOA crowd stumbles back, some raising their hands as if soldiers came to arrest them. The commander steps down from the lead truck, his calm voice carrying over the chaos. He announces that everyone not authorized to be here must leave or face immediate arrest for trespassing. The soldiers fan out, forming a new line that pushes the HOA group back toward their cars. Karen doesn't move. She stares down the commander, daring him to put hands on her. But her own board members start retreating without orders, muttering that this isn't worth jail time. One by one, the headlights flick back on as the convoy of HOA cars begins to turn away. Karen refuses to leave. She points at the cabin, screaming that it's hers by law, that this is harassment, that the entire guard will regret crossing her. Her voice cracks for the first time. The commander stays silent, simply nods toward the officer who steps forward and warns her that the next step is physical removal. Karen finally backs away, slow and deliberate, but not in defeat. She stops at the edge of the road, lowers her voice to a hiss, and whispers something to the man standing in the shadows behind the last car. He nods once and vanishes into the tree line without a sound. Lena notices. Her stomach knots as she realizes that this isn't over, that whatever comes next won't involve crowds or cameras. David sees the fear flash across her face and steps closer, holding her shoulder and telling her that no matter what happens tonight, they will not run, not ever. The HOA convoy pulls out, tail lights glowing red as they vanish one by one into the distance. The soldiers remain, watchful and ready, but the road feels too quiet now, like something is coiling just out of sight. David glances at the broken window and mutters that this is the last time they get to bring war to his porch. Lena doesn't answer, staring instead into the woods where the shadow disappeared. She swears she saw something glint in his hand before he vanished. Not a phone, not a key, something that looked like it could light up the night if you want it. She doesn't say it out loud, but David can read the fear in her posture. The night isn't finished. It's only sharpening its teeth. Sleep lasts minutes, not hours. The blast snaps everyone upright, a punch of sound that turns breath into ash and calm into panic. David sprints behind the cabin and finds the shed roaring, tools popping, paint cans hissing, memories cooking into smoke. Lena shoves a bucket into his hands. Soldiers form a chain, and for a brutal 60 seconds it's just water, coughing, and the stubborn will not to lose anything else tonight. Because how many times can a family bury pieces of itself? They beat it back by force and fury. The charred door hangs like a jaw ripped sideways, the ground wet and black, and the truth glows in the puddles. Gasoline trails snake toward the tree line. An ATV's tread marks kiss the mud and vanish into the dark like signatures written by a coward. And David's jaw sets because this wasn't rage, this was planning, and planning means more is coming, doesn't it? The commander radios it in. Patrols widen. Lena picks a shard of blistered wood from the wreckage and presses it to her chest the way people hold old photographs, then lifts her eyes with a steadiness that stings, telling David this isn't just about winning anymore. It's about stopping the next blow before it lands. The two of them move together like a single thought, deciding to get loud. Because silence never saved anyone from arson, did it? Town hall smells like denial even before the board pretends to be shocked. David walks straight down the aisle and drops the charred plank onto their table. He doesn't yell. He lists times, threats, and the moment a lit fuse kissed wood behind his home. The young board member with the shaky loyalty glances at the door and says they know nothing. His hands tell a different story, tapping a rhythm that sounds like guilt trying to hide under a tie. And whoever believed a face that blinks at the wrong words? Karen enters late, white shining like provocation, smile thin as a wire pulled tight. She calls the fire an accident and calls David dramatic. She says expansion will beautify the area and bring value. Lena steps beside her father and asks if the value includes burning grandchildren's photos for warmth. A murmur shifts through the room like a verdict trying to stand up, and Karen's eyes cut at her own board as if their doubt were treason. Because control breaks first at the edges, doesn't it? David pulls out printed threats, timestamps, and the county's bogus notice with its missing seal. He lays them down like dominoes that only fall one direction. The young member cracks. He says there was talk, not orders, and someone was paid for influence, not fire. Names wobble on his tongue until Karen's stare pins them down. He swallows them whole. The chair bangs a gavel and begs everyone to cool off. Lena says cooling off is how fires win. The room can't meet her eyes, and what kind of leadership refuses to look at heat except to blame the sun? They leave without a confession, but with something better. Fear now lives on the board, and fear is loud when it tries to whisper. The commander gets a text from a trooper posted near the trail, movement in the brush after the meeting. The shape matched the man from the seizure team who lingered too long earlier. He rode an ATV. He didn't ride it back. The line between county and conspiracy blurs until it looks like a rope around someone's neck, and who tightens it first? Night comes with teeth. Soldiers rotate in pairs. David replaces the shattered window with plywood and tells Lena stories about her grandfather's stubborn mercy while his hands keep working. She's listening and she's not, because every sound outside twists like a key in the wrong door, and she keeps replaying the board member's crack, the way guilt bent him like wind bending tall grass, and how long until the stem snaps completely. The cut happens fast. Tires sigh flat in the dark, one by one, low moans of rubber losing air as if the trucks are exhaling hope. A figure brushes past the generator. A knife kisses wires. The yard drops into a hungry hush. Radios turn to static. Boots scuff hard and stop. Someone laughs once, too close to the porch to be comfortable, and the laugh says sabotage more clearly than any speech, doesn't it? David steps out with the bat, and the stubborn calm of a man who has nothing left to lose that he is willing to give. The commander signals hands-free. Soldiers close ranks, and Lena edges to the door with her phone recording every heartbeat. A shape wavers near the fence. David calls to him without raising his voice. You chose the wrong side of a family. The shape answers that families end, contracts don't. The accent is county office more than street. The smell is fuel, fear, and the lie of easy money, and whoever gets paid enough to outrun guilt. A flare hisses in the saboteur's hand, red spitting at his knuckles. He rolls it back and forth like a coin trick, promising a throw he hasn't earned. Lena whispers to the camera that this is their arsonist. The soldiers spread just enough to make every step toward the porch a bad idea. The shape creeps closer anyway, confidence leaning on the expectation that good people blink first, but no one here has blinked all week, have they? David moves to intercept, and the saboteur darts sideways, fast and desperate, scraping along the property line to find an angle the soldiers won't cross. He tosses a fake, flicks the flare skyward, then palms it back like a magician hating his audience. He wants panic. He wants the throw to be the second thing you notice, not the first. Lena reads the trick and yells to the unit on the right. The soldier cuts him off so cleanly the man stumbles and shows his badge clip by accident. County. The worst kind of traitor wears a lanyard, because who checks a smile for gasoline? He recovers with a snarl and bolts for the trees. David is faster in anger than the man is in fear. He tackles him hard enough to knock the flare loose and pin a wrist that was reaching for something sharper. Gravel scours skin. The flare rolls in a circle like a red eye deciding whether to blink. Lena kicks it away with perfect aim. The commander cuffs the saboteur in a movement that looks like gravity doing its job. The mask is off and the face is exactly the one that lingered near Karen earlier. And how many offices smell like smoke when the doors are closed? He spits a story about pressure, about debts, about Karen promising protection and leverage. He says seizure was a done deal until the guard appeared and wrecked the timetable. He says his child needed a surgery and this was fast money. He blames everyone but the hand that struck the match. David looks at him too long and then looks away because hate is a weight that kills the person carrying it first, isn't it? The officer arrives, breath short from the sprint. Here's enough to write the rest in ink. The saboteur goes into the back seat with wrists shining where the cuffs sit. The commander logs evidence, time, and the exact words that link the axe to the woman in white. Lena uploads a clipped reel to the cloud, not for views but for safety, and pings a reporter she trusts through a friend of a friend, because sunlight loves paper trails more than tyrants do, right? Karen arrives in time to see blue lights and a man she used like a match disappear behind glass. She smiles anyway, a brittle arc that mistakes audacity for armor. She congratulates the officer on catching a lone wolf. She says this proves nothing about her. She calls the guard an embarrassment. She steps closer to David and whispers a promise that tomorrow brings bigger tools and braver men. She tilts her chin at the soldiers as if daring them to remember lines they will never cross, because bullies count on decency to feel like weakness, don't they? Lena answers with a voice that doesn't shake. She tells Karen the cabin is a vow and vows outlive paperwork. She lists the burned shed, the slashed tires, the cut wires, the flare, the confession, and the fact that the only person not afraid to show her face at a disaster is the one who ordered it. Karen's smile splinters. The officer takes a statement from her on the record. The commander files an incident report directly to the state attorney. The net stops being invisible. And who swims through a net while wearing pearls? Karen backs away, calculating, dialing as she retreats. Far down the lane, engines answer her call, heavy and many, the kind that carry blades, chains, and men who think cuffs are fiction. Lena hears it first and steps closer to David until their shoulders touch like a single brace against a wave. The officer radios for backup. The commander raises a hand and his units settle into a posture that means we're ready without saying it out loud, because tonight is not the end, it's the fuse. The night exhales once, long and quiet, like a stage inhaling before the curtain snaps. The first headlight crests the hill and multiplies into a string of glare that says the board emptied its budget into a final act. Karen's voice rides the wind, high with triumph. promising removal by force and paperwork later. David sets the bat down and steps forward with empty hands because the truth doesn't need props. Lena lifts her phone because the world needs witnesses. The commander steps ahead because peace needs a spine. The convoy fans out, doors open, men jump down, and the last sound before everything collides is the soft click of Karen tightening her gloves as if justice were something she could grab and twist. And what breaks first when a storm reaches steel? The first man off the lead truck shouts about easements and eminent domain like a spell that turns courage into permission, but the words bounce off uniforms that don't belong to him. And the silence that follows feels like a courtroom where the verdict already lives in the judge's eyes. So who really owns the next move? The commander doesn't posture. He simply draws a line with his presence and explains that any attempt to breach will end in cuffs and charges beyond anyone's budget. And the HOA crew trades looks that say they believed a story Karen sold them on credit, because salesmen always vanish when the bill arrives, don't they? Lena steps forward with calm that cuts like ice and lifts her phone to the sky. Live stream already rolling, captions stamped with times, names, and the saboteur's confession, and comments flood up the screen like witnesses arriving to sit in the front row. So how brave is a bully when the whole town is watching? David brings the county man's lanyard into frame, the same badge the arsonist flashed before the tackle, and he explains nothing. He just shows the burned wood, the cut cables, the flare scuffed by his daughter's shoe, and the simple sequence hums with truth that makes spin look silly, because lies hate timelines, right? The officer reads the saboteur his rights again at camera edge so no one misses it. And the commander radios the state attorney's office with a cool list of charges. And when the reply pings back with instructions to secure the scene and detain any interfering parties, Karen's mouth tightens as if she just bit into the cost of her own script. And who pays retail when karma sells wholesale? Karen still tries the pageant smile, swearing to the live stream that none of this touches her, that bad actors will be punished, but progress will proceed. And she gestures to the convoy like a monarch conjuring a wall. Yet the closest driver won't meet her eyes now that the comments are naming faces and posting company logos, because reputations bruise faster than windshields, don't they? Lena aims the lens at herself for the first time and tells the city something simple. This place is a promise, and promises don't burn. And her voice trembles only at the edges where love lives, and thousands of little hearts and shocked faces burst up the screen with a force no permit controls. So what happens when empathy starts to trend? David turns to the HOA crowd and invites them to leave now with dignity or stay and collect charges like trophies. And a few step back without excuse, staring at their boots like they found out courage is on backorder, while one man snaps that the neighborhood needs a clubhouse more than a grieving family needs a porch. And the commander answers with 2 words about criminal trespass that sound final, because law is loudest when it whispers, right? An older board member breaks first, shaking his head at Karen and muttering that none of this was in the plan, that fires and lies were never on the agenda they voted for. And he peels away with 2 trucks following him like guilt broke a dam. So how long can a crown sit straight when the heads beneath it start moving? Karen doubles down, calling them cowards, promising the remainder will finish the job, and signals a second wave idling down the lane to push forward with chains and crowbars. But the sight of soldiers locking shields in measured stillness sends a tremor through even her truest believers, because rage is heavy when it has to lift consequences, isn't it? The officer collects statements on camera, ticking through names with the steady patience of someone setting dominoes that only fall in one direction, and in the middle of it a woman from the crowd edges up to Karen and whispers that insurance won't cover criminal mischief, that her husband has priors, that this is a cliff not a ladder. And Karen smiles without moving her eyes because she can't blink now, can she? The commander receives a call and nods once, then announces that the state attorney is opening a formal investigation into conspiracy and arson tied to the seizure attempt, which means anyone advancing tonight becomes part of a case file. And for a breath the road holds its breath. So who volunteers to be Exhibit A? Lena leans to David and tells him softly that fear is switching sides, that the live chat is tagging journalists and elected officials, and within minutes the stream is mirrored across pages that love the outrage more than they ever loved the HOA newsletter. And suddenly Karen isn't addressing a street, she's addressing a state, and whose voice cracks first under that weight? Karen tries a pivot toward pity, saying she only wanted safety standards and community pride. But a siren climbs from the hill, and a second cruiser joins the first, and the officer welcomes his partner with a calm wave that looks like a gate locking, and a few men with tools lower them an inch because iron feels heavier when truth walks up, doesn't it? The county inspector in cuffs finally speaks to save himself, shouting that Karen told him to scare them, that she promised a favor with his supervisor, that the fire was staged to force a safety condemnation, and while a lawyer might call it hearsay, the live stream calls it a headline. And headlines write the next day's courage, right? Karen claps slowly with a frozen grin and says the man is lying to save his job, that families always invent villains when they can't accept change. But her voice runs out of road before the sentence ends, and the commander's simple request for her to wait by the cruiser for questioning sounds like gravity again. And gravity rarely loses, does it? For a tight minute, everything holds. Soldiers at ready, board members wobbling between fight and flight, phones tilted like mirrors no one can escape. And in that pause, David does something unexpected. He lifts the charred plank to his chest and thanks the crowd for showing the difference between neighbors and vandals, then invites any actual neighbors who regret tonight to stop by tomorrow and help patch the window. And the invitation lands like a bridge thrown across a canyon, because mercy embarrasses malice, doesn't it? A handful of people nod, ashamed and real, and one woman starts crying that her brother pushed her to come, that she never wanted this, that her kids played tag near that porch last summer. And the officer takes her brief statement with a kindness that steals oxygen from rage. And even Lena's eyes shine as the comments flood with support and offers of help. So what happens to a mob when it remembers it has families? Karen sees the ground shift and panics into power. She snaps her fingers at the second wave, orders them to advance, shouts that the guard can't stop volunteers improving community property, and two young men step forward before courage catches up to their feet. But the commander's voice lands ahead of them with the weight of a gavel, warning that the next step triggers arrests and civil liability that will follow them longer than their pride. And pride hates paperwork, right? Engines rev in defiance anyway, and metal clinks where chains meet steel, and the air tightens around the moment where choices leave fingerprints that never wash off. And Lena squeezes David's hand once, as if sealing a pact that began generations ago, then turns the phone so the world can see every face lined up against the future they picked. And lines this sharp usually cut, don't they? At the far end of the convoy, a tailgate slams, and something heavier than a crowbar drops into a palm, and voices stack into a chant that was braver in private than it sounds in public, and Karen lifts her chin like a conductor begging the orchestra to drown out truth. And the commander raises his palm for the last warning the law will give, and the crowd sways between retreat and ruin while the headlights paint everyone the same hard color. And which way does the first foot fall when the next second decides who becomes the story tomorrow? Engines snarl in unison, and the convoy edges forward like a dare, chains rattling, boots hitting gravel, faces set to the brittle courage of people who haven't met consequences up close. The commander lifts one hand, and the soldiers lock the line with a calm that makes noise look childish. David steps off the porch without the bat, palms open, not surrendering but refusing to give anyone the clip they came to capture. Lena's breath catches, then steadies. Her live stream counter jumps like a heartbeat learning to run. The first HOA foreman swings a hook toward the fence post and freezes when a trooper names the charge he's about to earn. He laughs to save face and drops it anyway, metal landing with a thud that sounds like doubt. Two more men start forward and stop when they catch sight of their own reflections in Lena's lens. Because it's hard to be brave when tomorrow's employer is watching, isn't it? Karen pushes between them in white that glows like a dare, promising reimbursements, legal defense, future favors that will never arrive. The older board member who cracked earlier tries to pull her back, pleading that the investigation changed everything, but she shrugs him off as if decency were lent. She points at David and announces that this ends tonight, and a few young men pump themselves up with chants that die before they grow teeth. Lena lifts the phone higher and speaks to the crowd and the comments at the same time, telling them to count who is willing to sign their names to a criminal record for a clubhouse while a daughter stands beside her family. The chant collapses into mutters. The officer reads the last warning with the cadence of a door closing. The state attorney's vehicle appears at the edge of the lane, unhurried, unmistakable, and even the boldest faces go pale in the way light goes pale before a storm. Karen chooses escalation. She signals to the tail truck and a tool chest opens to reveal crowbars, bolt cutters, and a hydraulic spreader borrowed from a friend who should have known better. A kid grabs the spreader with the thrill of a toy he doesn't understand and stumbles under its weight. The commander's voice lands first, "Step back or be detained." The kid obeys his survival instinct and sets it down with hands that suddenly remember their future. Lena leans to David with a whisper that sounds like steel wrapped in grace. She tells him the stream just hit 100,000 views and local media are mirroring it. Every move now writes itself into public memory. David nods and walks forward another pace, addressing the men rather than their queen, inviting any neighbor who wants peace to stand to the side and be counted as a decent person. 3 peel away immediately. 2 more linger, then join them. A small tear opens in the mob and starts to widen. Karen feels it and panics into theater. She climbs onto a tailgate and declares David a danger to the community, claiming leaks, violations, vermin, anything that sticks. Lena answers by panning to the repaired window, the deed, the report number, and the arsonist's arrest. The comments flood with names and screenshots and voters promising to remember. Karen shouts over them and orders the remaining crew to advance. This is the part where stories choose their villains forever. A foreman steals himself and yanks a chain taut around the corner post. The commander steps forward with 2 troopers and asks him to drop it. He does, and then Karen does what cowards do when courage deserts them. She grabs a crowbar herself and jumps off the tailgate with fury, so bright it looks like confidence. She barrels toward the porch, crowbar raised, promising to pry the door and the past in one swing, because when power stops working on others, it always tries to work on wood. David moves to meet her with nothing in his hands but everything in his stance, and for a breath the road holds its breath with them. The officer calls out for her to stop. She accelerates. The commander's palm flashes the final signal that separates warning from action. Karen screams about rights and progress and the myth of invincibility that carried her this far, and the last yard between them vanishes like a fuse racing for a charge. Lena breaks right, not away but into the gap, voice cutting the air with a plea and a dare at once, calling Karen by name and asking if this is the moment she wants to live on every screen her grandkids will ever hold. Karen hesitates half a step, half a second, then doubles down with a swing meant to splinter wood and will. David closes the last step, pivoting to shield without striking, choosing to win the only way that lasts, and the weight of the moment tilts the whole town forward. Behind them, a second wave tries to slip past the line while eyes are locked on the crowbar. The commander sees it and moves his unit 3 feet with the precision of a door sliding into a frame. A chain clinks to the ground like a badge dropping from a uniform. The state attorney steps into view at the edge of the lane, hands clasped, expression carved from consequence. The young men who thought they were background characters realize they are suddenly leads. Karen's crowbar arcs. David's forearm rises. Lena's shout threads through the noise and stitches itself to 100,000 hearts watching in real time. The officer lunges, close enough to change the ending by inches. The troopers brace. The board fractures down the center like a fault line finally admitting it was always there. Karen's face locks on David with the determination of someone willing to trade everything to avoid losing anything. Metal meets bone, or not. The instant before tells a different story in every eye that sees it. In that last heartbeat, another sound blooms from the far end of the lane. Not an engine this time, but a siren with a tone reserved for final acts. And a vehicle breaks through the convoy with markings that make even stubborn men step back. Doors crack, radios spark, hands rise, and in the split second where outcomes balance on a blade, the crowbar is still midair, David is still braced, Lena is still shouting his name, and the whole town leans toward the answer that decides who breaks and who finally bends. The crowbar never lands. David catches Karen's wrist mid-swing with a grip that stops her cold. The sound that follows isn't metal on wood, but the collective gasp of every throat on that road. Soldiers surge forward, and the officer pins her arm, while the second cruiser slides in and locks the scene like a vault. For the first time since this started, Karen isn't shouting. She's breathing hard, eyes wide. realizing that power finally belongs to someone else. HOA members who had been frozen at the edges scatter like birds from a branch. Some run back to their trucks. Some throw their tools into the dirt. Some shout that they never agreed to this. The board member who cracked earlier walks straight up to the state attorney and spills everything: names, payments, threats, like a dam giving way under truth. Every word cuts deeper than any crowbar could. Karen is marched toward the cruiser, still spitting half-formed sentences about bylaws and community rights, but they sound small now, broken, desperate. The handcuffs click and the last of her authority breaks with it. Mud streaks across her white sleeve as the officer guides her into the back seat. The crowd falls silent, even the engines cut. For the first time in days, the lane belongs to David and Lena. The commander lowers his voice and orders the rest of the convoy to disperse. One by one, the trucks peel away, leaving headlights fading like embers dying out. Soldiers remain until the yard is clear, their presence now a shield instead of a wall. The officer walks up to David and says the words he's been waiting to hear since this started. The property is secure, the seizure is void, and the charges against Karen will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Lena exhales like she's been holding her breath since morning. She drops to her knees and finally lets tears run, not from fear but relief, the kind that shakes you when you've carried weight too long. David kneels with her, pulls her into his arms, and thanks her for saving the cabin, for standing when he almost broke, for being braver than anyone should have to be at 16. She tells him she just kept a promise to her grandfather, the one about never letting the lake go. The state attorney stays long enough to sign off on a protection order and promises to send investigators for the rest of the board. David thanks him without bowing, because gratitude this deep feels like respect, not surrender. Soldiers fan out one last time before packing up, their boots leaving prints that look more like signatures than tracks. Just before dawn, a small group of neighbors return, not angry this time but ashamed. They bring nails, plywood, even a fresh pane of glass. No one speaks for a while. They just work, patching the damage their silence allowed. Lena hands them tools without malice, and one of the women says softly that the board is dissolving the HOA entirely. The banner that once hung at the community hall is ripped down before sunrise. David stands at the edge of the dock when the sky starts to lighten. Lena joins him, and they watch the lake settle after the longest storm of their lives. He tells her the cabin was his father's dream, but now it's hers too, and they will guard it together. She rests her head on his shoulder and says the cabin feels heavier now, not like a burden, but like something that matters more than before. When the last truck leaves and the yard is finally still, David picks up the torn seizure papers and nails them above the porch, a trophy not of victory, but of survival. The camera on Lena's phone catches the moment. It will be the last frame of the stream that kept half the county awake. This is the last part, and it ends with peace earned the hard way. The HOA is gone, Karen is facing charges, and the cabin is safe. David and Lena sit side by side on the steps, watching the first sunlight hit the lake, not speaking, because nothing left to say could match the sound of quiet finally belonging to them again.